Okay, I'm Eliot A. Cohen, Dean of Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. And to introduce this event, I'd like to turn to Ian Cockcroft, who's the Vice President of Careers in Diplomacy, one of the affiliation groups that we have here at SAIS. So Ian, over to you.
Thank you so much, Dean Cohen. And thank you everyone for coming to this important and timely conversation between Ambassador Harry K. Thomas Jr. and Dean Cohen on race relations and recent global events. My name, as the Dean mentioned, is Ian Cockcroft, and I am Vice President of the Careers in Diplomacy Club, the premier club at SAIS for exploring and developing a career in global diplomacy. I'd also like to thank Dean Cohen for asking the club to introduce this event, which ties in nicely with our forthcoming Ambassador Speaker Series. It will bring diplomats from around the world to SAIS for discussions on pressing matters of international concern. As always, the Careers in Diplomacy Club is grateful for the enduring support of Dean Cohen, along with our continued relationship with the American Foreign Policy Program. I'd also like to say that during this time of great uncertainty, which has affected not only SAIS, but the entire higher education system, and has had profound impacts on American foreign policy and diplomacy, we are extremely fortunate to have as Dean someone of such experience and lasting dedication to guide this institution. Eliot Cohen, as many of you know, was appointed Dean of SAIS in 2019, after nearly 30 years as a distinguished member of the faculty. After graduating with his PhD in political science from Harvard University, Dean Cohen has held positions at the US Navy War College, the US Army War College, and the Department of Defense. From 2007 through 2009, he served as counselor of the Department of State under Secretary Condoleezza Rice, where his career intersected with that of Ambassador Harry Thomas Jr. Ambassador Thomas is currently a senior fellow at Yale University's Jackson Institute for Global Affairs and a senior strategic engagement leader at Special Operations Command. Previously, he served as ambassador to Zimbabwe, the Philippines, and Bangladesh. After more than 30 years in the Foreign Service, he retired in 2018 with the rank of Career Minister. Ambassador Thomas also served as Executive Secretary and Special Assistant to Secretary Rice, Director General of the Foreign Service, and Director for South Asia at the NSC. Ambassador, we appreciate your service, and without further ado, I yield the floor to Dean Cohen.
Great, thank you so much, Ian, and thanks for the wonderful work of the Careers in Diplomacy Club. You know, it's part of what makes SAIS special, not just what goes on in the classroom and not even just events like these, but things that the clubs make happen. So really, I very much appreciate that. Ambassador Thomas, Harry, it's good to have you here at SAIS. You and I spent some quality time together working for Condoleezza Rice, which is one of the high points of my career, for sure. Can you just maybe begin by just saying a little bit, what exactly does the Director General of the Foreign Service do? That was actually one of my questions when I first heard of that title. I was like, what does that mean?
Well, thank you, Dean, and thank you, Ian, for the introduction. The Director General of the Foreign Service is responsible for human resources, for civil service, the foreign service, and the over 180 labor programs that we have with countries where we have local employees, which we call foreign service nationals. Same time, you're responsible for assignments. And part of the committee, of course, that selects ambassadors, selects principal officers, recommends deputy chiefs of mission. It's all encompassing. And you're also supposed to be the role model for the foreign service and the civil service. But I was honored to be Director General and very grateful to Dr. Rice for having selected me.
Yeah. Well, you've had such a remarkable career. I do want to talk about some of your postings. I wanted to talk about international affairs, but I thought that particularly given the moment, it would be appropriate for us to talk about race in America. And if it's okay with you, what I'd like to do is just start with your own career. So let's begin. You entered the Foreign Service when?
I entered June 1984 when I still had a lot of hair. And I was assigned to Lima, Peru after language study. It made me very, very grateful that I had the opportunity to learn Spanish and live in a country where you had to speak Spanish, and left. Vice Consul, then we went to Kaduna, Nigeria. When the plane landed in Nigeria, the first sign I saw is, "Black is beautiful, drink Guinness Stout." So I said, oh, this is a little different. But I was able to also serve in New Delhi after Hindi language training under Frank G. Wisner, whom I'm sure you know,
Yeah.
and Dick Celeste. Uh, Fascinating country, India. And again, it speaks to the importance of learning language and culture, as well as understanding their religions.
So let me just ask you very directly. As a Black American, did you face any particular kinds of challenges in your Foreign Service career? What
No, only the only brazen one I actually had in my first assignment, where the consul general said he was not inviting me to the beach because all real Americans tan. And when the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday was passed, he said he wasn't going to celebrate it, but it was a federal holiday, so he had to take off. And the Foreign Service made sure he did not make the senior Foreign Service for the treatment he meted out, not just to me, but also to women officers in his comments. I didn't have any brazen comments like that after that. I had great mentors and supporters of all races and colors. It would have been a challenge to serve in the European Bureau, then as it is today, is a region that has had very few officers of color. That said, I had a fantastic career, a blessed career, and owe it to many people and also my parents.
So when you were challenged, as I'm sure you were, when you're speaking up in the way in which you do about American ideals, American values, American commitments to human rights, did you ever have anybody turn around and say, well, let's talk about race relations in the United States?
Oh, many times, from my first to last assignment. And I would say, yes, we are striving to be a more perfect union. These are our challenges, and this is where we've made progress, and this is where we need to make progress. And I would always acknowledge the challenges our nation faces. And then I would ask the person asking to talk about his or her country. Some did candidly, but many were either afraid or unwilling to examine the flaws that their own nation might have. And that's not to excuse ours. But I felt during my career we were always trying to do better, not always succeeding, but trying.
You know, one of the things that's always struck me about the Foreign Service is you get a view of your own country as seen from afar. You know, every embassy is a little piece of America. You always feel that when you walk in there. But you also get a very, very particular kind of view of that country. So with the advantage of all that perspective, where do you think we are right now, specifically with regard to race relations?
Well, it depends from your vantage point. I have the vantage point of age. I think that clearly the last almost 7 months with COVID-19 and the Black Lives Matter movement, the tragedies of Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, and others have brought this to the forefront. And I wonder if COVID-19 hadn't happened and people hadn't been teleworking, would they have had the time to witness and examine themselves? So yes, there is a challenge. And it gives us an opportunity to say we are going to do better. We're going to try to be a more perfect union. And we will see whether this movement is sustainable. I think in other countries, in Europe, Asia, they don't look at racism or colorism. We are looking at it. And again, I make no excuses for the racists in America. But I, like Dr. King, were always more worried about the moderates who wouldn't give us opportunity than the members of the Ku Klux Klan. And when, you know, Dean, the America that you and I were born in would not have had an African American, no matter how talented, as an ambassador, would not have had a Jewish person as a dean. The Foreign Service I joined, that was when women had to resign if they got married or couldn't join for some quirky reason if they were over 6 feet tall. And, you know, some male had to have written that rule. But again, we have a long way to go. We don't excuse the racism, the injustices against anyone. We don't excuse anti-Semitism, no matter who says it. We don't excuse domestic violence. At the same time, we don't smugly ignore it. We try to confront it, and that's why I think in many ways has made us different. But we've got to be better as we go. We have to be humble, we have to be listening, and we have to try to not only help ourselves if we're going to be a role model or Ronald Reagan's shining city on the hill. I think because of the young people, we're going to get there.
So let me ask you a few questions about your career, and then I'll throw the floor open to. I'm going to throw the floor open to questions. I think if participants have questions, please put them in the Q&A box, and I'll curate them and pass them along to Ambassador Thomas. If you could identify yourselves in the question box also. I'll be giving preference to students over everybody else. So what was your toughest moment in your diplomatic career?
My toughest moment was before I went to Zimbabwe, when I was reading in as we do, and I came into work one day, and I guess they were a little scared. The front page of the Zimbabwe paper said, they're welcome, who is this N-word? And it didn't say N-word. And this was November 2015. And that got to be almost monthly on the front page of the paper in Zimbabwe. Our Assistant Secretary, Linda Thomas Greenfield, convoked their ambassador, complained, and sometimes you get an apology, sometimes you did not. But you don't expect that, especially from an African nation that had fought for its independence. Our public affairs officer, who was an African-American distinguished person, who's now our principal officer in Osaka, just a wonderful Japanese linguist, was often called Aunt Jemima. But you understand that you have to control your emotions, that you won't respond in kind. And so for the entire time I was there, I ignored it. And I would go about my work because I had an entire mission to lead and couldn't get caught up in these things. And I only, on my last day when I was interviewed by the newspaper, complained, and it was, of course, ignored by the government. Not one Black Zimbabwean ever apologized or said a word to me about that. So that was tough because you don't expect it. From other quarters, you might expect it, but so yeah, and I say that to tell the students, you never know where a challenge is coming from.
Were they doing that just to get under your skin personally, or as a way of taking a swipe at the United States?
I think both. I think both. Obama was still president when I was there, and when he was supporting gay marriage, Mugabe was very hard on him because, of course, Southern Africa, as many parts of Africa, many of its leaders are anti-gay. So that may have been part of it. The continuation of sanctions, another. But that's the point. You can't let them get under your skin. You can't let them see you sweat, and especially when you have to run a mission.
You know, that's a quality that I try to learn, but it doesn't come naturally to me. Did it come naturally to you?
No, of course I had times when I failed. Once I was unknowingly on TV and I yelled at a person. That ended up being on CNN. And that person said he told people he used it to get dates. So I don't know, maybe he was a desperate person. But yes, so after that, I learned never to lose your temper in public, try to control it in private. And I would say these days, with video cameras everywhere, you need to always take a moment.
So let me ask this is just a question that popped into my head. You know, I was very conscious when I came to the State Department that I was this outsider wearing a bow tie, although it turns out there are a few diplomats who wear bow ties too, parachuting in to an institution that was dominated by an extremely capable cadre of career foreign service officers and civil servants, most of whom have been around for a very long time and I think knew their business. And of course, that's the experience of, I mean, it's an experience you must have over and over again of outsiders showing up in roles like assistant secretary or counselor or all kinds of things. As a career diplomat, how do you feel about that? What do you know, what does the bureaucracy really think?
Well, we welcome. This current administration has gone overboard and with having all assistant secretaries and others being political, but usually it's a mix. We find out people that have worked in campaigns have lines of communication that we don't always have, and they can open doors for you. You never want groupthink. Groupthink produces Vietnam and the Bay of Pigs. So you need a muse. And often when you look at the people that have come from both Republican and Democratic administrations from outside, they have been high intellect, high moral character, and forced us to look at things in different ways. And almost all of them were highly qualified. You know, every president appoints a Chevy dealer's ambassador to Timbuktu or something like that, which they shouldn't. And I pray that doesn't happen again. But by and large, we learn a lot from each other.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I came away with an enormous amount of respect for my career colleagues at State, and it was very satisfying working with them. Let me ask you a different question. Again, I just want to remind people you can begin putting questions into the Q&A session now, and I'll begin throwing them at Ambassador Thomas. I'll ask just one more. In a place like Zimbabwe, a dictatorship, when you were there, with a pretty atrocious human rights record, you know, you're standing up there defending American values, you're standing up for human rights. How do you measure progress? How do you know that you're succeeding, that you're doing your job, or you just kind of keep on plugging away and hope for the best?
Yes, we keep on plugging away. We all join the Foreign Service thinking we're going to be Henry Kissinger or Dean Acheson, but that's not the case for most of us. What you're trying to do is not only project American rights and values, but help people. So maybe the kid you gave the computer or the books or helped to get a scholarship to SAIS or someplace else is your legacy. The fact that you were able to speak up for gay rights or go and protect women. We in the Philippines, where domestic violence, like much of the world, is a challenge. After meeting a group of women and seeing how great they were personally, and they did not like the term victim, we hold fundraisers. State Department lets you hold fundraisers. And we were able to raise over the equivalent of $1 million Filipino dollars to allow these women to have their own safe house and their own journal. And so you can do many things that may not win you a Nobel Peace Prize, but will change lives.
Yeah. You know, I think that's, if I could generalize that, I think that's a point that's particularly important now when there are a lot of people of all kinds of backgrounds wondering, well, what can I do? And You know, as you say, we're not all going to be Martin Luther King or somebody like that, but we can make concrete changes that will change lives. And that should be a source of satisfaction.
I think, Dean, the thing that I'm most proud of in my career was in the Philippines, our USAID director, Gloria Steele, came to me saying thousands of women die each year from bleeding in their uterus, postpartum bleeding in their uterus. And if they could get a drip, which women in the Western world get, it could end that. But it was too expensive. So let's find a way. And we partnered with American pharmaceutical companies. We came up with a shot that cost under $1 a day, which was too expensive for them. And the US government and the pharmaceuticals funded it. That was almost a decade ago, and we know we're saving a lot of women's lives. And with that, children, because children need their mother to, the statistics are harrowing when a mother is not in a child's life. So that I'm most proud of. And that was the US government, AID, State Department, working with private business and the Philippine government to make this happen.
What a great tale. Okay, let's turn to some questions. David Youngblood, what do you advise young people of color to do to prepare for a career in foreign service?
Well, Mr. Youngblood, I would say a couple of things. One, for everyone, study languages, verbal and oral communication, learning how to, we don't write in foreign service, we draft, and understanding that sometimes overseas you're going to be seen as an American Black as opposed to a Black American, because you're representing and working for the United States. And try to discern, if you do face racism, colorism, what is racism, what is colorism, and what is somebody being rude or stupid. And understanding that, unfortunately, sometimes you may take it, but if you do come into it within the department, then use whatever channels are available to get redressed. And if you do not, go public.
But I think I think where part of the question is going is, what would, in a way, this is advice to, say, a Sci student who wants to go into the Foreign Service, who's a young person of color. Is there anything that they should be doing in particular, would you say? Anything that would anybody else?
No, I would say, I know it might be disappointing, but I think the skills you need to succeed are the same no matter what color or gender you have. You have to also hope that you have mentors and superiors who will help you along the way. But I don't think that you need any particular different skill. And again, as I can't emphasize how much most people overseas will look at you as an American first if you're working in an embassy.
Interesting. We have a question from Carly Wright, who is an incoming student. If you could teleport back to a post and position, which would it be and why?
Well, it would be back to Dhaka, Bangladesh, my first opportunity to be chief of mission. I know many people would say a surprise, but they were wonderfully kind people. It was a majority Muslim nation trying to be a democracy. They resented being called moderate Muslim. We resented being called a Muslim democracy because we would not want to be called a Christian democracy or moderate Christians and Jews and Muslims in America. But I had to learn about economics and trade because they produce so many of our textile clothing. They import shrimp and export shrimp, crayfish. In those days, we had quotas. Louisiana took them to court over the importation of prawns and shrimp and won. So it's so many different things, especially not so much child labor, except in the shrimp industry, but labor of women that had terrible conditions that were terrible. You see, whether you're working on a line for Tommy Hilfiger or Walmart, it's the same line, women right next to each other. making maybe 12 cents an hour in those days. If they had made 25 cents, it would have been a decent living based on the cost of living there. And I also, lastly, had the opportunity to meet Muhammad Yunus and work with him. He's one of the world's great people. Dean, when he won the Nobel, I happened to be walking through the State Department cafeteria, and that came on, and I started jumping up and down. And later we were able to welcome him through Dr. Rice to the department. And he and others who had studied in America took a song that became after the Bangladeshi national anthem, Amra Koboy Joy, the song that every Bangladeshi knows. And it's a song of independence and liberation. And that song in English is called We Shall Overcome.
Really?
Yes.
Wow. Wow, that's something. There's a question here which has been asked in several different variants. I'm going to read one from Brandy Darling, who's a current student, and give you what I think is being asked.
Okay.
As a Black student at SAIS, where many students go into government positions, I want to understand, how did you find the will during your career to defend the United States internationally, even after many racial injustices throughout the country? And I think the operative word there is will. I mean, there must have been times where there are things happening that hurt, or things that make you angry. And yet, you know, you've shown extraordinary will and perseverance. Where'd that come from?
Well, again, as I said earlier, I didn't excuse any time there was an incident or systematic racism in the United States. I would explain it. Say I truly believe that people were working to make it better, as I do today. Even though we're at a time fraught with peril. And my job was to represent America. You have to understand that the person or persons that you always support are not going to win every election in a democracy. And if you truly believe in democracy, that's going to be the time you're really going to represent the government of the day. You're not going to go to your local friend and say, I just have to say this, or I really don't agree with that. If it gets to that point, you need to resign. Because what we're trying to do is be role models. We're trying to show people in developing nations and in developed nations that we truly respect and we believe in what we're saying. And if you try to be cute, they'll know you don't. You will have no value for them. So although it could be challenging, especially in my early years, during the apartheid, I always endeavored. And as you got more senior, nobody ever told you you couldn't say or do something. I never had that. I think the challenge, if I were in Washington today or overseas, would have been, if I'm saying it, do they believe that our president or secretary of state supports it?
Yeah. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that's it.
So that actually leads to a question from, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Sean McElhouse. Good morning from Seattle. I'm an incoming SAIS Europe student with aspirations towards foreign service. I'm encountering a lot of despair with my contacts and in the State Department, given the current administration's evident hostility towards diplomacy, which seems to demand my own reevaluation of future plans. Is the State Department's foreign service still a viable career option for people who wish to effect positive change in the world?
Yes, I believe so. First of all, when you're a junior officer, you're doing visa work, vice consul work, and it's important because you're helping people come to America to study, to work. You learn languages, you learn what's going on in the nation. It takes many years to rise to a policy position, maybe more than people think. And I think this is an excellent time to join. Unfortunately, fewer people are taking the test the last few years, but you get a leg up on them if you do consider joining. And I think, let's not be naive. People at SAIS are going to go work for an NGO, the US government, or Google, Microsoft, Facebook. And let's not think there's no sexism, racism, anti-Semitism in these corporations. That would be naive. The great thing is that, Dean Cohen and I worked for President Bush. He's been judged harshly, we understand, on Iraq and somewhat on Afghanistan, but he is so respected in sub-Saharan Africa for the President's Emergency Program on AIDS relief. And that is something that President Obama funded more and kept. President Bush keeps defending it. President Trump has not stopped that program. And we've refined it, and we've saved lives. And it took American leadership to do that. So look at the whole person, the totality of what the U.S. government and embassy are trying to do when you're deciding whether or not you want to take the exam.
What valuable perspective. How would you explain the importance of the Foreign Service to the American public? That's from Deja Gainey, who's an incoming SAIS student.
Well, welcome to SAIS. Good luck. I think that it's two perspectives. It's not just human rights and democracy and values, which are extremely important, but we also help American businesses, whether we're trying to sell Boeings or computers or open opportunities. We help non-governmental organizations get to work in these nations. We help charities who have trouble, believe it or not, donating books and toys because of tariffs. So it's totality. We bring people to America and Americans overseas, whether it's the great musicians like Louis Armstrong stopping the war in the Congo, or refusing to perform in apartheid South Africa years ago as a role model. There are so many things we do. What we have to be better at is explaining to the American people how we help businesses, how we open opportunity for others. I think the universities this week, Harvard and MIT, joined by so many others, went after the administration over student visas. That brings foreign students to America, brings perspective, also brings tuition paying students, if we're going to be frank about that. So there are many things we do. We have to be better at explaining it, though.
So I'll just note Hopkins filed its own lawsuit, and I wish I could say that story is over. It's not, unfortunately. Yeah. It's going to be virtually impossible for new international students to come to the States in the fall.
Safety and security of the people that work with us in the embassy, foreign and domestic, are paramount. However, having been on the visa line, there are ways to issue visas without having people catch COVID. This is a political decision, which we understand, and I'm glad that the universities are fighting this, and they should. And the students in the universities really need to join them as a major issue.
So I have a question from a member of the Student Government Association, William Zhao, never bashful about expressing a view. And he takes issue with your reluctance to lose your temper. And I think I'd have my own answers to the question he's about to ask, but I'll put it to you since it was addressed to you. Ambassador, you mentioned that you never lose your temper in public. But with so many injustices before our eyes, it's also extremely important for all of us to speak out against these disgusting acts. How would you address these situations? And do you think at some point being cordial and polite are just not going to be enough, and some yelling is needed? So
no, I don't think yelling works. Nobody wants to be yelled at, including you, William. People don't want to be told what to do. That doesn't mean, I'm from New York City. We are frank. We are candid. You make your points. You try to find ways to demonstrate what you want to do. But I don't think that yelling and screaming is going to have a long-term effect, because whatever change you want to make sure it's sustainable, whether it's in America or overseas, and somebody yelling and screaming just does not carry the day.
If I might, I'll associate myself with those remarks. I think it's an important thing to learn about one's professional career, that actually yelling just alienates people. It doesn't get you very far. Different kind of question from Ava Shen. What advice do you have in studying languages in the field of international relations and diplomacy? Ambassador, you speak so many languages yourself. How did you achieve that? What does it take?
Well, through hard work and trying to overcome my New York accent. I think that the first language, and I'm sure the SCI students know that you need to understand, is English. What happens for some students, particularly students of color, who've gone to schools that do not always emphasize grammar in English, they come to study languages and they don't know how many tenses there are when they're talking about preterite, subjunctive, these things that we take for granted. So study English first. And then I think going into a Romance language. From a Romance language, then take Hindi, as I did, or Hungarian, or Japanese, Korean. These languages are so important. You know, I'm from New York, Elliot's from Boston. We speak different English. When I went up to school, I didn't know what a frap was or Jimmy's. And it's the same thing if you go to other places. My wife is from the Philippines, and having lived there for 3.5 years, I thought I understood everything about the Philippines, culturally, language. And then I married someone from the Philippines, and I realized how little I know. So languages and culture make a tremendous difference, and crawl before you walk, unless you are one of the supremely gifted linguists. I think it's really important.
I think that really speaks to what you had said earlier about the importance of humility and being willing to listen, and why you have to listen to other people in their language, even if it's a version of English.
Yes.
We have several questions which I'll try to put together. One from Veda Vidugiris, and again, I apologize if I'm mangling your names, and Elizabeth Alonso Halifax, which is really about diversity in the Foreign Service, but it's also really about diversity in the leadership of the State Department in particular, but more broadly. And I guess, the end of Elizabeth's question is, what kind of representation is necessary in the Foreign Service? Should it be in line with the US population, for instance?
Of course, but you have to have programs and leaders. When we work with Dr. Rice, let me tell you a story. One morning, Ambassador Ruth Davis, a distinguished retiree, came to me and said, we need money for the scholarship fellowship program that brings in people of all races. It's our ROTC program. It's called Pickering Program. It was running out of funding. And so in the morning meeting that Dean Cohen and I used to attend, I asked Dr. Rice for $1 million. And she immediately said yes. But we turned that into the Wrangle program for a lot of other reasons. And so Dr. Rice made a decision, $1 million, to sustain that program. I hope that the Pompeo and Trump administration will increase the Wrangle and Pickering programs, because tuition and room and board get more expensive over years. And now the students have to take, some of them have to take loans to go to school, which they didn't under Dr. Rice. Dr. Rice, I went on to the Philippines under Secretary Clinton, but Dr. Rice selected me and 3 other African Americans to serve as chief of mission in East Asia and Pacific. That was the only time in US history we had 4 African Americans as chief of mission in East Asia. So it takes leaders of that kind. And again, she didn't shout, she didn't dance, she doesn't go around saying that that's what she did, but trust me, that's what she did. When we went to Montgomery, Alabama, and Biola Battery, Louisiana, after Hurricane Katrina, in church, Dr. Rice's daddy was a preacher, and that's where you see her old style come out with Jeff Sessions, actually, in Methodist Church. A student came up to me, was going to Xavier University, and said they had been washed out, and she was out of her pre-med program. Gave me a handwritten note. I gave that to Dr. Rice. She called the president of Baylor, and that student and some others were admitted for the year. So you have to have leaders of that ilk. What is disappointing has been that my fellow Foreign Service officers who have been in leadership positions in Europe, Near East affairs, East Asia, have not often or always selected African Americans to run, or Latinx, to run parts of those, to be political counsel, the economic council, public affairs. It's been more of an old, quote, boys and girls network among them. And they need to be brought to task. And that system needs to, which is systematic racism in my opinion, needs to change. But thanks to not just Dr. Rice, but Ambassadors Kenny, Ambassador Hoffman, Ambassador Pickering, Grossman, they gave people of all races and gender opportunity. And then it's incumbent upon you to do the same. Two of the three posts I had a woman as a DCM. When I was Director General, my principal deputy assistant secretary was an African American. And these were quality people. So you do the same and give others opportunity, and be thankful for people that I had the opportunity to work with.
We had Secretary Rice here with us a number of weeks ago. And one of the things that she really did emphasize was the importance of, first, of doing concrete things. But the second is you open doors, and then it's up to people to take advantage of those open doors. And so there are obligations on both sides.
Oh, yes. I guess I'm old. I still believe in being twice as good as anybody. No matter who it is, the Foreign Service is extremely competitive, and any profession that someone from SICE is going into is going to be competitive. So no matter who you are, you better try to be the best. Somebody can be better at languages, listening or drafting, but nobody can outwork
it. Yeah. So different kind of question. Irene Richwine, as a graduate of SICE and fellow alumni of Holy Cross, I'm interested in knowing what was the impetus from your education and background to enter the Foreign Service?
I wish I could say it was Holy Cross, which I love. Actually, I was working as an urban planner after graduate school in Columbia for a man named Edward J. Logue, who, Elliot, you may be familiar with from Boston Revitalization. He was a graduate of Yale in his law school. He had to convert from Catholicism to Episcopalian and marry the dean's daughter in 1948. Such was Yale. But Ed was a great builder and a former Foreign Service officer. He's the person that told me about the Foreign Service. I had to go to the library, no internet in those days, looked it up and said, oh, USAID, that's what I want to do, development. And the CIA, I can be like James Bond. Really? And I applied to both, and they both rejected me, so I had to take the Foreign Service exam. And luckily I passed. If I had failed, I probably would have gone to something else. But thanks to Ed, I'm sorry that he's no longer alive, but I am pleased to be at his alma mater these days, and I wouldn't have been there if it weren't for him.
Yeah, it's a lovely school from my home state of Massachusetts. So from Joshua Cart, oh, by the way, you should know that one of the people in the audience is a mutual friend, Ambassador Harriet Elam Thomas.
Oh,
No
wonderful. Hello, Madam Ambassador. You are a joy and a role model.
Oh, she also spoke at SAIS, and it was, I just felt I'd made a friend for life.
Yes.
We're glad to have her in the audience as well. So from Joshua Cartwright, current SAIS student, you made the point earlier about how if you're a diplomat, you have to be a role model, have to keep the arguments in-house, you have to advocate policies that you may personally disagree with. But are government bureaucrats doomed to have to carry out anti-democratic or blatantly cruel policy? Are there things that they can do besides resigning?
Well, let me be clear. I was never asked to carry out a racist policy and anti-democratic policy. The State Department that I joined, whether you agreed or not, was trying to affect positive change, not always succeeding. There were people during Iran-Contra, during the former Yugoslavia. Many of my friends protested, wrote letters. We have the Dissent Channel. We give an award for that, where they wrote this dissent. It's anonymous.
Could you tell people a little bit more about that?
Excuse me?
Could you tell people a little bit more about the Dissent Channel? I had to read some of those as counselor, and I just thought it was, what an extraordinary thing to have in a government department, and I still at it.
It was developed during the Vietnam War when a lot of officers, including Peter Tarnoff, the former undersecretary, went outside and protested. And President Nixon wanted to fire them, and Secretary Rogers protected them by coming up with the Dissent Channel. And it's where you can send in a message, we call them cables, saying how you disagree with American foreign policy and make recommendations. It's extremely important because, again, let me refer to my time in Bangladesh. There was a gentleman named Archer Blood who was our consul general in what was known as then East Pakistan. And he was railing against the injustices of the West Pakistanis, whom President Nixon and Secretary Kissinger were working with to open a channel to China. And when he talked about what were the tragedies, the atrocities against the East Pakistanis, his career was ruined. And if you go back to the China hands, who told the truth about China after World War II, their careers were ruined to the point that when we opened up China, I think Ambassador Freeman was our only fluent Mandarin speaker 30 years hence. So you can't let these things happen. So that's one of the things. You have to also, if you have a good chief of mission or assistant secretary who's willing to listen to points of view, that's important. Secretary Powell, when the Iraq war was starting, listened to Ryan Crocker and Bill Burns, who wrote a famous paper on how this was going to lead to a disaster. They were right, but they went and served. Ryan, ambassador to Iraq and Afghanistan, he felt it was his duty, but he was also being honest and transparent. Secretary Powell has our great respect for so many things, but also allowing internal dissent, even when he knew his political superiors at the White House would say no. So there are many types of ways that you can allow dissent or creative dissent, especially when you have good leadership.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to bring Ryan Crocker here. He's really one of the great heroic figures of American diplomacy, a guy who sacrificed his health in public service. But if I could push that question a little bit further, because if I'm reading it correctly, what I'm hearing them say, okay, even something like the Iraq War, you can say, well, reasonable people could and did disagree, and whether it's wise or prudent or something. But I think the question is really more about what happens if you think somebody is really doing something that is morally wrong. Or
if you're working for somebody who's doing something morally wrong, I know it can be difficult to talk to that person, but we have channels back to the department, to the Director General's office, to the Office of Equal Employment Opportunity. We have, I'm not a member, but we have the American Foreign Service Association that you can talk to. They provide attorneys for its members. There are many ways to go after this. Now, if somebody is doing something morally wrong, then and it's your boss, then that person needs to be exposed. Unfortunately, because of laws and privacy, I can't tell you, but it's direct cases. But when we had people, most of the transgressions you see in the Foreign Service or in an embassy overseas are sexual nature, on occasion, domestic abuse. And when you find out about them, you, as ambassador, you can send them home. You can try to make sure that they are brought up in charges. Of course, they have rights, and then you have to leave it to the legal system. We've had people accused of rapes. Those are morally wrong. Those are the things that you see more often than not. Policy is something that can be argued over. But yes, and that's why when you're running a mission or on your way up, you have to exhibit the best moral characteristics. You can't be easy or do the wrong thing. You can't get drunk. You can't get high. You can't abuse someone. You can't talk about someone, because you're going to be faced with these cases. And people have to respect you. You have to deny yourself, in my opinion, in order to lead.
So we have, I think, time for one last question. And then after that question, I'm going to ask if you have any concluding thoughts for our current students, we have a lot of incoming students who are listening to this as well, which I'm delighted about. But first, let me ask the last question. Has this administration damaged the State Department and American standing around the world?
Yes, 100%. If you look what happened to my dear colleague, Masha Jovanovic, Bill Taylor, they represent different aspects of the political spectrum. Being professionals, let's not forget what happened there.
Yeah.
It really humbles and hurts us to see the rest of the world pitying us because people are refusing to wear masks, or even listen to our distinguished alum of the College of the Holy Cross, Dr. Fauci, on his as they try to hurt him. Yes, yeah, no doubt about it. And this is what bothers me every day when we see this. However, November 3rd, we have an opportunity to make change. And if we don't make it in November 3rd, 2020, we have that in 2024, 2028, 2032. Most of the countries that I served in, they don't have that kind of change. India clearly doesn't get enough credit for its democracy. But Zimbabwe may have the same type of president there. Last thing I would like to say before Eliot, despite the challenges I faced in Zimbabwe, when Mugabe was about to go down, they had the first ever protest march since independence in 1980. And it was majority Africans, but whites, coloreds, South Asians, and all Zimbabweans. And they had to march past our embassy, which was right next door to the Russian embassy. And as they marched by, they chanted USA, USA.
Wow.
I'll never forget that, brought a tear to my eye. It shows that they were not stupid. They were being held down. So when we live up to our values, people will chant USA, USA. When we don't, they will curse us and they will be right. And it takes over 50, 60 years, they'll still remember our transgressions. So that's why we have to do the right thing. But please remember that. They chanted USA, USA. Not because we're perfect, but because we're trying to be.
Wow, that's kind of a tough one to follow. Do you have any other last words you want to say to the students, or should we leave it at that?
Students, be optimistic. You're young. Be optimistic. You all, as Gandhi said, can be the change. You can make life better here and abroad. I know it sounds against what you want to hear, but I truly believe the United States has to be one of the leaders. And we have to work with other countries, countries who did not have the opportunity because of colonialism to input into the International Declaration of Human Rights. Countries that have different views of individualism, countries of different views of trade. Now, certain things are wrong: human trafficking, domestic abuse, anti-gay rights. But if we don't lead, if we don't participate with our allies and perhaps our adversaries, these things can easily get rolled back. We're not a transactional country. We're a democracy. And you all can make that better. And those of you who are from foreign nations, keep pressure to make us better and try to make yourselves better in the places that you are allowed to.
Well, Ambassador Thomas, Harry, thank you so much for spending the time with us. You know, you gave us a lot at a time when a lot of people are not optimistic. I think you gave us a dose of optimism. You showed what a career of service looks like and a career of accomplishment. And you've left us with a great deal of inspiration. There were a number of points there where there was this kind of lump in my throat. So I can't thank you enough on behalf of myself and all the students and faculty and staff of this great institution. So thank you, Harry.
Thank you. And may I just say to Brittany and Ian, Pedro, and Sonia, thank you for making this possible. A lot went into it. God bless and take care.